Good morning, everybody. Welcome to Wet Weekend North. I'm the first act today, and I'm going to be talking about Fortean Sport. So, without further ado, what I'm going to be going through are three articles that over the years I've had published in Fortean Times. One is called Power to the King, as you can see, The Curse of Aaron Ramsey, and Faster, Higher, Stronger, Weirder, which is about some of the stranger Olympian events that have taken place. The Power to the King is actually about, some of you might remember, I don't know if you're all football supporters or whatever, but in 2016 Leicester City completed what was called a football fairy tale by winning the English Premier League. But what was it that actually won them the ultimate prize? Was it the goals of Jamie Vardy? Was it the silky skills of Riyad Mahrez? Or was it the defensive strength of Huth and Wes Morgan? No, it was the intervention of King Richard III. Now you can see him wearing his Leicester City kit. So when they won the prize, you can just about see him very close to where the king, the crown is, because being a king is very important. So what you might wonder is, how did this happen? Well, Leicester have always been a bit of an unfashionable team in the Midlands, and they won the Premier League in 2015-16, the first time in their long history. They beat a lot of mega-rich clubs, but they narrowly avoided relegation in 2014, their first year back in the Premier League. Now, they were 5,000 to 1 to win at the start of the season, and quite a few people actually put a tenner on it, which good luck to them, great faith in it. The manager was the short price favourite to be first manager to be sacked. Now, how did King Richard III play a part in all this, you may ask? Well, I know that he was killed at Bosworth Field in Leicestershire in 1485, but it was thought that there might be a link to the fact that he was found under a social services car park in Leicester in August 2012. And for those of you who don't know, he was actually found under the parking bay marked R. That is true. So, at Leicester, back in 2010, they were bought by a Thai consortium, and they were fronted by a guy whose name I can't really pronounce because it's so long, Vichai, unpronounceable, a billionaire businessman. And they did a sponsorship for the shirts, and then the company's name was the King Power Group. So the group bought the naming rights to the club's ground in 2011-12, and it became the King Power Stadium. Then, at the time, Leicester were languishing in mid-table in the second-tier championship. But it was at the end of 2011-12 that Richard's remains were found. But from there on, City went onwards and upwards. And they reached the playoffs in 12-13, and actually won the championship the following year, gaining promotion to the Premier League. Promotion coincided in May 2014 with a judicial decision that Richard should be reburied in Leicester rather than York. There have been many advocating that York should be where he was born, but they were ignored. And besides, that they ignored the fact that Richard was born in Fotheringay in Northamptonshire, just over the border from Leicester, and so his nearest top-tier team to his birthplace was actually Leicester City. So therefore, Leicester City was his home team. And in the 2014-15 season, They had an absolutely terrible start. They were bottom of the table in March, and after losing 4-3 to Spurs, they were 7 points off safety. They'd drawn 2 and lost 6 of their 8 games. In fact, they played 29 and had only got 19 points. Now, I'm going to apologise to Huth here, because even West Bromwich Albion this year got more points after that number of games. But the very next day, 22nd of March, Richard III was reburied in Leicester Cathedral, just a mile from the King Power Stadium. Great ceremony. It was a bit like a state funeral. I was there, it was terrific. From there on, Leicester won 7 of the last 9 games. They took 22 points out of the possible 27, and it was the best form in the Premiership. Better than Man United, better than Man City, Chelsea, Arsenal, whoever. And they ended up finishing 14th. So the following season, fantastic championship winning form, played 38, points 81, they were the champions. But if you look at the form over 47 matches, after he was buried, they played 47, won 30 of them, draw 13, that's 103 points. It's a phenomenal turnaround. Now, what could Richard's influence be? But the fact is that in ancient Greece, a city or a sanctuary might claim the remains of a venerated hero or as part of a hero cult. And the bones are not usually regarded as having the power derived from the hero, but the presence serves what is called a tutelary, if that's the right pronunciation, function, acting as a deity or a spirit who is guardian, patron, or protector of a place, such as Oedipus's tomb was said to protect Athens. So when Richard III had a proper tomb where people could pay their respects, maybe he began playing his role for his local city and his football. So that's the spirit. What you've got to remember is that football became prominent in the early Middle Ages, where the first bouncing balls were invented. So it's possible, because of the late 15th century, that Richard III actually had an interest in the game when he was alive. Certainly, if his spirit had survived death and maintained an interest in the sport, it will have been delighted to have been reburied in Leicester rather than York, because at the end of the season that Leicester won the Premier League, York City were relegated from the lowest tier of the Football League. Tragic. So, is it all true? Of course it's correct. Anyone can make spurious links between different things to make a tenuous argument, and perish the thought that a lifelong Ricardian who lived in Leicester for over 3 years should stoop to such practices. Therefore. Right. The next part, the curse of Aaron Ramsey. Okay. Robin Williams dies, Aaron Ramsey scores. Has the Arsenal star's curse returned? Curse of Aaron Ramsey returns. David Bowen, Alan Rickman died as Arsenal star scores. So, who is Aaron Ramsey? I mean, I'm presuming that not everybody here will necessarily be that familiar with this guy, but he's a Welsh footballer born in 1990. He plays midfield for Arsenal in the English Football League and for Wales national football team. He signed from Cardiff City, his hometown club, in 2008. And so the question is, what on earth can the curse be? Well, what it is that whenever Aaron scores a goal, a big name celebrity dies. And the strange phenomenon became apparent in 2011-12 when Osama bin Laden was declared dead just after he scored against Manchester United. But then Steve Jobs died just after he got a goal against Tottenham. Colonel Gaddafi just after Aaron got the winner against Marseille. And Whitney Houston found dead in a bathroom just hours after he scored a goal against Sunderland. And hours after scoring in the 2014 Charity Shield, what do you find? Yeah, Robin Williams is dead. So, More recent examples, Fast and Furious actor Paul Walker, David Bowie, Richard Attenborough, Alan Rickman. I find the idea that Aaron would want Alan Rickman to die hard to believe. Sorry. And he's at it again. On Thursday, Arsenal in the Europa League. Aaron scored a goal, and the next day, Eric Bristow dies. I mean, that proves it, doesn't it? Right, but on that note, we're going to show you a video which highlights what something can happen.
Aaron Ramsey's kick of death. When Arsenal's Aaron Ramsey gets near the goal, famous people around the world get nervous. Because each time he scores, a well-known celebrity dies. When Ramsey netted against United Manchester in May last year, Osama bin Laden bit the bullet. When he hit the net against Spurs in October, Steve Jobs passed away shortly after. His goal against Sunderland last week precluded the death of diva Whitney Houston. Whose turn will it be the next time Ramsey hits the target?
It's all rubbish. Right, that's, well, I just make out to, there is no curse of Aaron Ramsey. How can this be? Well, the fact is, there are so many celebrities that in this world that at least one of them dies every day. And therefore, every time Aaron Ramsey scored, probably Jamie Vardy, the centre forward, or whoever, a celebrity will always die around that time. So the likely explanation is that, you know, there were some Arsenal supporters in the pub chatting over a pint, and the fact that he only scores a limited number of goals. And then he scored goals around the time that Jobs and Gaddafi died, and then jokey comments about the coincidence. Joke gets passed on and becomes an urban legend, and journalists can't resist using it, can they? So, I thought I'd do some work on this and looked into identifying the celebrities who died within a day of each of the 36 matches where Aaron Ramsey scored between 2008 and 2014. There were 4,500 deaths in the UK and nearly 22,000 in the USA on each of the 3-day periods. That's a hell of a lot. And Life in Legacy website lists about 30 to 40 famous people who died each week. And lists of death by year. I mean, some people spend their time producing these things. Has over 10 deaths every day. So inevitably, a couple of dozen celebrities are going to die on the 3 days surrounding any goal by Aaron Ramsey. So there is no curse of Aaron Ramsey. Okay. Faster, higher, stronger, weirder. Now you'll all recognise that faster, higher, stronger is the motto of the Olympic Games. But we're going to talk about Olympian Games, i.e. the games that preceded the Olympics. I have to stress this because the word Olympic is copyrighted and all that sort of thing, so you have to refer to that. But you've got the history of the Olympic Games, going back to Much Wenlock, which is in Shropshire. Are people familiar with where Much Wenlock is? Yeah, nice little market town in Shropshire, not far from Wenlock Edge. And back in the 19th century, Dr. William Penny Brooks had the games, the Olympian Games, which he promoted for the well-being of people, and particularly young people, and inspired by the original Olympic Games. And it's Penny Brooks who invited Baron Coubertin to the Special Games in 1890. And Coubertin wrote, "If the Olympic Games that modern Greece has not yet been able to revive still survives today, it is due not to a Greek, but to Dr. William Penny Brooks." He later wrote, Wenlock people alone have preserved and followed the true Olympian tradition. Coubertin was so impressed that he adopted several of Much Wenlock's games, ideas and practices. The incorporation of, I'm never sure, is it pronounced Nike or Nike? The winged goddess of victory into Olympic medals. Imagery of crown of olive leaves, as with the Olympic winners in ancient Greece. Pageantry procession of flag bearers, competitors and officials with Olympian hymns and oaths. Artistic events. And moving the games from town to town with the host town funding the games, which was always a bit of a neat one, I thought. The next slide is a photo of the Wenlock Games from 1867. And you can see there's a huge crowd there. And this is actually believed to be the earliest photograph of any sports event in the world. What Penny Brooks wanted was the whole game should have been for the benefit of body and mind. That should be that's for that. With prizes for the 3 R's of school, reading, writing and arithmetic, and the 3 R's of athletics, running, riding and wrestling. I didn't make this up, this is what it said. So what you've actually got are there are 4 categories I'm going to run through, and the first one is they had an arts event, and there are arts events held in conjunction with the Olympic Games these days. But as you can see, there were some crackers there. A brass band contest, the best poem, drawing, English essay, glee singing, handwriting. I'd have failed that, I would have got on the shortlist. Knitting socks, making a shirt. Sewing, solo singing and spelling, scripture, history and watercolours, landscapes and still life. So maybe Glenn could have been doing some of his painting if he hadn't done that. Now, athletic events. Climbing a 55-foot rope. And then you've got the cycling, but it wasn't ordinary cycling, it was on penny farthings. And actually, these days there are some guys who do vintage racing of that, and it's supposed to be quite spectacular. But the first winner of the penny farthing race, I think he fell off a couple of times, but still managed to catch up. And apparently, the way he trained was by giving up smoking. Egg and spoon race. Hopping 50 yards on a leg, obstacle race, pole leaping, but putting a quarry stone. And that's intriguing, but what you've got to remember is that around the Wenlock area there were a lot of limestone quarries. And what this special event was aimed at the men who were working in those quarries, and the stone weighed 56 pounds. Now, the current men's shot put is only 16 pounds. So you're talking about something that was 3.5 times the weight. And the way the competition worked was to throw the stone with one hand, a bit like putting the shot is at the moment, and then when you'd done that, you had to throw it again, but then with the other hand. And the prize went to the person who threw it the greatest distance when you added the two together. Now, that to me is a real trial of strength. Quoits, regatta, I mean, that was at Shrewsbury, messing about in coracles and punts, the sack race, the three-legged race. I mean, this is great, so it's just like school sports day, isn't it? But, tug of war, and then you've got the Zulu contest. Now, you have to remember that the Boer War was around those days. And this was throwing an assegai at a target 60 foot away. Now, they have been talking about trying to make darts into Olympic sport, but I mean, compared to hitting a target over 60 feet, an assegai, darts is just for wimps, isn't it? The next one is military links events, all of them on horseback. And you have to bear in mind that at that time, Late 19th century, Britain was good at having wars. You know, I mean, we were in Crimea, we were in the Boer War, you name it, we were out there killing people. And so a lot of the events were linked to showing off the soldiers' skills. And the balaclava melee was a mounted mock brawl in which soldiers armed with single sticks attempted to knock plumes off each other's helmets. I love the gym crack race. Stop horse, dismount, put boots on, jump, drink, smoke a cigar, and repeat at set intervals. I mean, that's just making television, isn't it? So, horseback wrestling, that's a superb picture, thanks to Huth over there. I really love that one. And tent pegging. What this was that it involved spearing a series of wooden pegs that were driven into the ground. And the points were scored for whether the peg remained intact. This was derived from what actual lancers used to do when they would charge into a hostile camp and literally spear out the tent pegs of their enemy, trapping the enemy under the tents inside the canopies, so that then their colleagues could come charging in and finish them off, presumably. Umbrella and cigar race for the yeomanry, the Victoria Cross race. What that was it was a competition over fences where riders had to collect man-sized dummies, usually filled with straw, which represented wounded men that they had rescued. And then they would put them over the horses' withers and then gallop home. So first one with the winner. But the top event of the whole Wenlock Olympian event was tilting the ring, tilting at the ring, which is not a euphemism, which was constantly described as, I say, the most popular, attracting crowds of 10,000 in 1876. What it did is it recreated the practice of knights jousting tournaments with mounted horsemen charging under a frame on which hung a small metal ring. The objective was to dislodge the ring with the lance and keep it there until the horseman passed under the frame. In later years, to make it a bit more difficult, they added hurdles. Now, this is a picture of actually taking place, so you can see that there will be a ring suspended from that. And then the next thing is, this is a presentation, so you can see the pageantry, and that guy there is actually Penny Brooks. Okay, what they also then had were some fun events. He wasn't daft, he wanted to get the crowds in, so let's have a bit of fun. Now, these are Olympian events, not many of them necessarily survive to the present day. Blindfolded wheelbarrow race. Now, I don't think the wheelbarrow was actually blindfolded, and I presume it was the men that were pushing it, but we're not sure whether there was a passenger in there who was also blindfolded or was giving directions, as the case may be. But you can imagine that it was a recipe for mayhem, but it was reported that one winner of the blindfolded wheelbarrow race somersaulted over a hedge at the end to celebrate. I presume that he took his blindfold off first. There is no information about how many politicians took place in climbing a greasy pole, donkey race, and then a jingling match. What's a jingling match? It's a kind of blind man's buff with bells and involves blindfolded children chasing a man who had bells about his person. The child that caught him was the winner. If this was repeated today, I think it would present a lot of nightmarish health and safety issues. In 1856, there was an old women's race for a pound of tea. Now, in my mind's eye, I can imagine sort of like a big suspended rod with a pound of tea at the other end, they're all running like mad. But it wasn't like that, it was actually just a sprint. And the prize was a pound of tea, which in those days was a very valuable prize. And the elderly winner was a lady, a really old lady of 45, called Mary Speak, with a 38-year-old coming second. Prison base was a bit of a tag game where you send out a player, and the first team sent out a player, then the second team sent out a player to tag the first team's player, followed by the first team sending out a player to tag the second team's player, and so on. The goal was to tag out all the other team's players before they reached the designated home. Apparently this was played by adults and children and was so popular in 14th century London that Edward III actually banned it from the Palace of Westminster because it was so noisy and rambunctious that it actually distracted government ministers in their work. It's a pity that doesn't happen today. But, last but not least, arguably the most bizarre was the pig chase. A report stated that the pig started in the middle of the field and led its pursuers over hedge and ditch right into town, where it took ground in the cellar of Mr. Blakeway's house and where it was captured by a man named William Hill. What's the better than that? The prize was for the winner to take the pig home with him. I couldn't find out in my research about what actually Mr. Hill did with the pig, but anybody who's from the West Midlands like me knows that pork scratchings are a real delicacy. I did say the Wenlock events were weird. This is the character Wenlock from the 2012 Olympic Games, which was the two characters that looked like they landed from outer space. And one who was Wenlock in paying homage to the work of Penny Brooks. And if any of you fancy going to the games, then they do still take place every year. And this year they'll be over the period, end of June to third week of July, with the main event being on the 15th. The sports that happen these days are archery, athletics, badminton. There was gliding at one point, cricket, schools hockey and so on. And if you're going down to past in the area of Much Wenlock, there is actually a Wenlock Olympian trail, and the website's there, which guides you around with things written on the walls and on the pavements and so on. And there's a little museum, so it's well worth stopping off to have a quick look around. And a couple of years ago, because I've done this research, I wanted to see the game myself. I went to it and they actually asked me to present some of the prizes, which was very flattering. That's me handing out a gold medal and another one there. So, okay.